In the beginning of the pandemic lockdown in early 2020, I was working an unessential archiving job at a hospital. It was a time job and I was going to finish my service in October of that year. Due to COVID, I was sent home for a month with the rest of the department, free to contemplate the cracks in the ceiling when I realized there was an opportunity for a funny joke. See, similar to the title of a comic I heard a few things about over the years that some of my friends really like. I was, let's say, Homestuck at the time. So I thought, hey, wouldn't it be fun if I, for just a bit, maybe as a joke, read this comic, see why everyone says it's so bad, maybe some jabs on my buddies, fun stuff. And then I fell in love with Homestuck. Homestuck isn't good. This isn't revelatory, this is an interesting take, this doesn't take much effort to substantiate, and this isn't something that's interesting to me anymore, 2 years after being involved in parts of the community. I know it's bad. It has slurs and ableism and all the classic side effects of being made by a white chump in the turn of the millennia with no editorial insight on the creative process. But I love it. More than anything, I love two things about it, the visuals and the setting. Let's start with the latter. When I was like 10, I remember writing a terrible story in class about entering into the world of a video game and meeting crazy creatures. But I don't have anything else to share, I just remember writing that when I was a kid. And then, 10 years later, the same idea suddenly kickstarts the entire plot of this 8,000-page behemoth I started flipping through for a joke. And this isn't the first time I've seen it. In a way, comics about real characters in video game worlds are like the bare bones of comedy online for me. What if Mario just walked sideways bypassing the level? It's just like one of the first memes I remember ever seeing. And this comic is having fun with Sims in real life, combat in real life, crafting in real life, leveling up in real life. It's a delightful, weird little comic about video games and friends on the internet and talking to trolls and looking up guides and cheat codes and sending the world's smallest JPEGs to try and help your friends. And the best part? Homestuck is about that game going horribly, horribly wrong. SBURB, as portrayed in Homestuck, is the edge of an edge case. It's basically the worst case scenario of playing the game that isn't simply death. And the result of that is that we don't actually get a comprehensive view of the game the story takes place in. A fictional game we don't know everything about goes wrong, and we never really get to see it act right. The background gears of the universe creation engine are kept mostly obscure and half-mentioned. There's a part in the comic where Rose, who's been attempting to write a guide for the game, just decides it's not worth playing by its rules and finishes her guide by saying, "I'm going to rip this game to shreds instead of playing. I suggest you do the same." And I found that fascinating. The other thing, which I understood way later in my work but absolutely did hook me in, is the visuals. Not the cool flash animations or the epic action shots, those are great, but the way the comic is facilitated in sprite form. Sprite mode. That's what most of these types of panels are called, because they're recurring models in recurring poses moving around a board, a cardboard simulacrum of actors walking around a set. They're basically chess pieces with detailed heads, and sometimes they're just chess pieces without much detail. I remember when I was probably 8 or 9, I realized I can go into the folder of the Plants vs. Zombies game and edit the sprite sheets, and if I invert enemies in the editor, they're inverted in the game too.
That's the coolest thing about Xbox Live.
It was rudimentary and childish chicken scratch doodles, but I remember being fascinated by the idea the game made such animated, moving visualizations of these plants and whatnot by just moving these still images around. Same with Angry Birds. It was just big sheets of expressions that I couldn't believe were just switching in and out to make this dynamic, moving, blinking game. The Zamboni sprite sheet was amazing to me. Look at this. All these parts forming separately, and the game chops it up and moves it around to make this roaring, rickety machine that feels like it has pistons and levers and engines. It's not just a picture on a popsicle stick, it's a complete rig of layers. I wasn't a big part of the sprite comics culture on video games, but once I learned of them later, I always loved them. Mario and Luigi RPG sprites being reused as expressions for these bland plumber characters, the awkwardness of using different sprites from different entries, edits of Mega Man character sheets to be generic White Man the Thousandth, and this kind of approach to visuals, the efficient reuse of existing art in a new context, I love it in any damn context. Undertale using sound effects from one context in another, Shovel Knight cutscenes reusing specific animations to convey new ideas. It has the ridiculous charm of bumbling around a Lego minifigure to convey that it's talking, a playable game character using its abilities to do something that it can't do, such as emote and be a character in fan content. That's Homestuck. Homestuck is those non-talking Lego figures, animating around the room and catching and jumping and falling for visual gags, all played as an adventure game character failing to do anything in a Sims world. It's astonishingly satisfying to make compelling visuals out of, with such obvious efficiency. I love it. So I wanted to make my own. Okay, so the main thing you want to avoid is everything Homestuck did. Specifically, avoid spending 7 years telling one story. Avoid changing your plan drastically midway through. Avoid making weird vent offshoots to try and scare away the audience you accidentally gain. Because while Homestuck had a lot of cool stuff I talked about, most of that went away as Homestuck started just being about itself for the second half of it. So avoid doing all the bad stuff it did later on, but you do want to plan forward. So let's get back. My fascination with Homestuck's story was the background fake video game we didn't get to see go right. So I wanted to write a story about a successful SBURB run, a run where the players are destined to win as opposed to the gloomy, foreboding, predestined death of all that Homestuck's SBURB was about. 2 sessions doomed to fail, prevailing against all odds, all that. This story would be about being destined to win. The immediate idea for a theme I had in mind was SBURB TAS in 841-5306. A tool-assisted speedrun of SBURB, a perfectly executed rush through the story my however many characters go through towards something that'll guarantee their success of the game. Now I could start planning. I wrote down all the elements of all the stuff that need to happen in SBURB and then got to planning characters to get those things done. Firstly, classes and aspects. A lot of people seem to believe that in order to create a universe using SBURB, the session needs to have both a time and a space player, because any universe needs those 2 things, but I think that makes no sense whatsoever. The Kid session didn't have Doom players or Mind players, Terezi was a black hole at the end. Do people in this universe not have minds? That doesn't mean anything. You don't need to have any specific players, save for space. You need a volcano. That's one of the weird prerequisites that I love about SBURB and how this bizarre afterbirth of Homestuck's chaotic writing and humor affected the game. You gotta have space player. And you gotta bring a volcano with them. Them's the rules. You just do need a space player, and they have to have a spare volcano. Good luck. Also, a space player and the knight are needed on frog baiting duties, which is where my first character design idea actually comes into play, a knight of space. Saving up on player responsibility by just having the knight who accompanies the space player be the space player, and now is the fun part, interpreting this idea. In my reading, knights in Homestuck are leaders, planners, tacticians, by desire and otherwise. The need to organize their friends into a team that can advance and survive is nature to them. Browsing the space aspect names across zodiacs, Sagaga, the indigo their space sign of the builder, was perfect for this. Next up was someone to carry more emotion in the story, someone who'll go through a harder quest than others in order to make a clear metaphor, maybe even try to say something with the story. So first I needed a metaphor. Originally, I did really plan to do a speedrun story, just rushing through mechanics and joking along the way, but the release of the fantastic short comic SBURB Done Quick already did that while I was working on this comic, which kinda sent me into a rewriting panic, but in the end it was for the best. It got me to actually want to tell a story with ideas and not just a SBURB guide slideshow. So, in this story about being destined to win, I figured an authentic metaphor I could and would want to talk about is the false promise of a future. I was just out of high school at that time, and yeah, the hardships of life fell on me like a truck. Didn't really know what to do with myself, and I barely do now. I had a privileged and protected life, and I got a lot of things very easily, and once high school ended, I had to face a lot of closed doors. That's the character I wanted in the story. The person who thought this was going to be easy and lead to a good life, and has to face a whole lot of nothing, waiting, and problems they'd rather run from. And if that sounded like garbage self-insert fanfic, just you wait, because I got the sign for this character from my own extended Zodiac quiz. I got Kanza, There's Cancer Mind, sign of the producer, which I think is very cute, but to lean to the airheaded bubbliness of this kind of character, I switched them to Prospect Dreamer, ending up with this rather axolotl-looking Canra sign. So, I had two characters, a Durst Architect and a Prospect Loser. The team felt dour, so I wanted a character with a positive, possibly insufferable belief in the operation. Someone who assured everyone there's a plan and it's going well. Some asshole to lead the team on blind hope alone. Luckily, blind hope led me well into the sign of the certain, a teal prospect hope sign. This guy would be very self-assured, rushing into things he just believes are the way they're meant to go, and how well it's going to go, and left completely lost whenever something unexpected happens. In writing, every character is some reflection of the author, whether they share opinions and views or oppose them. It's still the eye of the author writing those views of the views, and this guy would be a good way to continue the self-examination the comic allows me to do as an often overconfident, foe knows what they're doing kind of person. This is a good time to remind you that my creative ponderings aren't oversimplified characters being based on loose ideas of me does not mean you know me, so don't think this is a window to the soul or something. It's a comic about aliens playing The Sims. The last character would be someone who didn't want to be involved. The idea of a saboteur made the session destined to win interesting to me. In a very literal anti-hero sense, instead of seeing fated doom and fighting against all odds, this character would find the promised victory detestable and try to set it back. In the original timeline of events I wrote for the story, this character was actually barely visible in the plot, just kind of sitting back and doing a few things because it was convenient, but once I decided to put her in the game only a third into the story and with a goal of setting everyone else back and seeing what that does, then I had something interesting. 4 characters down, classed and aspected to my heart's content, Twin Prospect, Twin Durst. All that was left is to actually design them, which is where we come to the quite interesting hurdle. I don't know how to draw. That's the fun part. I thought I was going to relish with sprite mode that you don't actually need to draw like an actual comic book would require one to do. But I was wrong. Oh, I was wrong. I was not even close to being possibly right on that. Homestuck is not all sprite mode and is absolutely not without drawn art by a skilled artist. So, before October of 2020 came and I was able to finish work and start working on the comic seriously, I took the time to prepare. I tried hacking together as many assets as I possibly could with my limited toolset. First order was the stuff I knew would be no problem to do with a mouse, the houses. I mean, I did attempts, very laughable now attempts at doing the house exteriors without working on isometric grids, but the fun really started once I could polygonal lasso select entire wall sides each time side by side to make the facade of the house. Starting with floors, then both walls, I do a little sketch of the general area, then execute on the clean, complete grid. Through the process of studying Homestuck assets closely and trying to replicate them, you will learn all sorts of weird little tricks like making sure to keep anti-aliasing off on every tool separately in Photoshop so you get that classic crunchy look, and assets you can later re-extract from panels in perfect condition. Holding Alt and going in a calculated diagonal 1 down 2 left or something to make a tail of copies, and then inverting your selection and darkening it to look like a shaded extruded wall. All the small function keys and how they're held in free transform to make your process infinitely easier. And it's only the authenticity sometimes. You can't just use any pixely font for the effects, and you can't enlarge a similar font because if you want that OG accuracy, you're gonna want Courier New in bold style, not with a faux bold effect, with no smoothing, and scale it up by a multiple of 100% after rasterizing the layer. Otherwise, it's not gonna look right. For bonus points, make the text shadow copies before making the text bigger. It's a fascinating, almost archaeological experience to try and reverse engineer all the little oddities and methods that made Homestuck panels end up like they did. Let's go into another panel, building block for building block, and see what happens, what goes into making just one of these panels. Page 868, Rose captulogging a power hub and her laptop. The background is made of repeating green cubes. There's 48 variations on the colors of the top LEDs, and they're peppered randomly to make 2 rows in this direction. Those 2 rows are then copied over and over to complete a square. This complete massive square of hubs is then copied and darkened to make the chessboard visual of the entire area, which is what you see in the corners. Rose herself is probably a layer group, currently displaying the standing legs, torso, head, and various face layers, all in their default position, along with a few layers for the hands, one in front of and behind the laptop layer. Outside the layer group is the ejected hub and a drawn wire from it to the laptop. On the top left, 4 shrunk down capture cards in Rose's 3 modus colors hold various items from earlier in the comic. Now, animation happens. If I ask you what happens now, you might think the hub shows up on the top left inside a card, but it actually just moves down by under a handful of pixels. It then doesn't just show up on the top left, but shows up 1 pixel to the left and under, where it actually stops for 0.2 seconds before moving around. This is tickback. You might have heard the animation advice where an object going from 1 to 10 doesn't just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but should probably follow an acceleration pattern the eye will enjoy following, like 1, 3, 7, 9, 10, speeding up but letting you notice where it's going. Tickback is a term coined by Reddit Stuck author Bin, describing a frame of overshooting the final position of a moving object by just a smidge, so on the actual landing frame, the object appears to tick back into position 1, 3, 7, 11, 10. Adding tickback, adding this small preceding frame to movement where the object overshoots or winds back like the hub did at the start of movement, is the salt and pepper, the bread and butter of MSPA animation. Any movement can look more believable, more noticeable to the glancing eye if it has that tick of movement, that light jitter to signify this object zipped over here instead of just pure teleportation. And teleportation is aplenty. The card on the top left continues teleporting, now without wind-up frames, just ticking back into a new position each time with a new drawn wired laptop, resting for 0.2 seconds. Notice how the wire doesn't tick alongside the card, because that'd distract us from the main object of interest in motion. Working with such static assets and such light sprinkles of movement, you can't really afford idle movement in the rest of the scene that could lose the attention of the reader. After the box settles at the bottom of the tree modus, Rose captulogs the laptop, which moves in the same manner. It winds up in Rose's hands before teleporting and ticking back to position at the top of the tree, trickling down every 0.2 seconds plus 0.05 seconds of tickback, with a new wire position. The final frame rests for 3 seconds, which is the Homestuck default and my go-to for just enough time to process what happened, laugh at the funny visual, and move on, or stay around for a rewatch of the GIF before getting antsy from waiting. Not too fast, not too slow. And that's a panel. That's all you need from the page. The comedy of a wire going for the captcha to the real world and then itself, messing with the reality of the world, the practicality of picking up items, and the snappy animation to convey it all with the most minimal motions ever. So, the animation is pretty much the saving grace of the artless artist in me planning to make this Homestuck comic. But those assets didn't make themselves, you know. Andrew Hussey is or was a skilled artist, and I simply was not. So I turned to the public for help. No, not really, I just used a troll generator my friends found. Farrago Fiction's Doll Simulator is an extremely valuable pool of art and custom assets that is so overused and undercredited by those who use it, it's astonishing. Please, 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 if you use the great art made by and for Farrago Fiction's website, be fair and credit them. That said, If you are using this website, don't make my mistake and not know what you're trying to mimic properly. Not all assets in Fargo Fiction are particularly style accurate to Homestuck, and in my rush to assemble assets for my comic, I kind of didn't pick the most fitting options to the Homestuck trolls. Like, biggest mistake everyone including me makes is using black outlines on gray clothes because of the simple logic of outlines are black, but that's absolutely and consistently not the case for Homestuck's trolls. Black clothes use gray outlines, the opposite doesn't really show up ever. Trolls also always have black hair. I made my Prospect troll have light gray hair with a black outline, somewhat without noticing, seriously. Because of how color works in Fargo Fiction, colors don't always perfectly match. To recolor code the assets in the editor, they use slightly different hex codes for different parts, including I left and I right, so I realized very late into asset assembly that I had some unequal grays and oranges on the same characters that I had to bucket tool over and over all my assets. And yeah, assets. The best part of Fargo Fiction is the ability to use the original PNGs of every layer and save that individually to make a perfect layer group amalgam of your troll. I had the head base, the hair, the back of the hair, legs, torso, each eye, everything could have its own layer for max animation flexibility. I also used these wonderful assets made by various contributors to Homestuck.net, sprite sheets of a bunch of different characters from across all of Homestuck, ready to be ripped out and remixed into my needs. It was a somewhat tiresome process of redoing sleeve lengths with a mouse, recoloring the outline perfectly to make gray-colored sleeves and black-colored palms, but after a lot of very repetitive work, I made these huge folders on folders of layers for every character, including alternate designs for Dreamers, Selves, and God Tiers. Again, all of this I was still doing with a mouse. I was just amassing existing art from Fargo Fiction and Homestuck and many other places to just stockpile visual material to use for when I want to actually start active production on the comic. Only a few weeks after I started the comic did I even own a drawing tablet because I was dead set on the old ways of just sprite mode and reuse semi-sprites. See this video for details. And just using that to coast all my way through. My dad legit just felt like this pixel surgery shit was a terrible way to do art and got me a simple Wacom tablet as a birthday gift. And honestly, that was the saving grace of the rest of the comic. See, my brain was very much stuck in a rut of I don't have prior art experience, so learning just for the comic would be a bad idea because it'll be a ton of bad art right at the start and that'll draw people away. But as the comic went on, not trying and making that art that, yeah, might have been a little wonky at the start, but not making any of that unique art would have left the comic feeling so distant, so weightless. I'm really glad I used a lot of shortcuts when I started using the tablet. I upscaled and lowered the opacity on a source sprite and just traced and redrew to get the proportions right. After some light adjusting, I had a mostly serviceable semi-sprite ready to go, and this was a very useful way to slowly be able to draw even without the reference. I was teaching myself proportions, line weight, tapering, carving, studying Homestuck semi-sprites and my own assembled sprites from their many different sources, teaching myself art backwards and forwards at once. And this shortcut-loving approach to unique panels was important because something I really wanted to have in my publication process was speed. Hussey made, drew, and published Homestuck at an unacceptable rate of sometimes 10 pages a day for weeks. The comic went way too fast to handle. I didn't want to go that crazy, but I did very much want that daily update effect. See, an important difference between me and Hussey publishing this comic of the same format is that when Hussey made Homestuck, there wasn't a Homestuck. This was a big lesson I learned reading other comics on the site. So many of them also begin with my idea of, I want to make my own Homestuck, but begin at the same name entry point Homestuck did, and the slow pace of Homestuck's Act 1 doesn't motivate those authors as much because both them and their readers have already read the first act of Homestuck. Even if you want to add some twists and gags and derivation on those events, if you're using Act 1 to introduce the basics of an inventory system, chat clients, and SBURB, you're doing something that everyone reading comics on NMSBFA has already seen. So what happens then? The creators sit around waiting for commands, like Homestuck did, but the adventure's familiar structure doesn't inspire readers on MSPFA to leave commands, so the author keeps waiting on updates because that original audience engagement of Homestuck is a very cool and inviting concept for a lot of people. Without updates, the adventure gets pushed back in the site's recently updated tab, getting even less attention, and the author figures nobody cares and moves on. Thousands of adventures left in the dirt. This vicious cycle is not something I wanted for my comic, so I wanted two big things for it. The first, stay on recently updated. Daily updates on a schedule, same time every day. I'm free to take breaks. I didn't take this religiously, just took care attentively. I want my comic seen, I want my art in the hands of people, so I'll make sure to stick to it. I'd make my panels with a general idea of what their narration and dialogue is a while before they need to go up. So if I don't make panels on any given day, I can still update that day and the next. The writing of narration and dialogue would be done closer to release so it feels fresh when I publish it, and the copying to MSPFA would be done 10 minutes before updating on 4 PM my time zone. All the finished panels would be uploaded to the hosting site early so I can update from anywhere using Borrowware Pipe or FileGarden, the best hosting option for MSPFA. This isn't a paid ad, Pipe was just made by the creator of MSPFA, pretty much made for this purpose. I had strict rules, color BB code would wrap around entire chunks of color, not per line to clutter the screen. There's 2 line break gaps between panels and text. There's 1 line break between multiple panels on a page. The commands never have a space at the end. I made sure to understand how exactly the automation of the site works in advance, like how it adds the angle brackets to commands by itself, so I don't have embarrassing doubles in my links. It's about being careful and consistent so the reading experience is clean and nice. And also, I just enjoy forming these formatting habits, because I'm weird. Sue me. The second big thing? Open in a way that stands out. I didn't want to do Act 1. It was important for me to not do Act 1. So, I made Act 1 as a joke and sped through it. This was a bit of, as they say, odd flex, making about 90 unique still panels that resemble the events of Homestuck's Act 1, only to speed through them in one GIF that says, Act 1 happened, imagine it, now let's start at the fun part when they're in SBURB. It took about 3 weeks total to make all those small panels, while at about the same time I started making and writing the actual start of the comic. It's structural Act 1, titled Act 2. It took a lot of quick asset making, most of it very lacking and shoddy by my current standard, but it was serviceable panel for a fast-moving GIF, that's for sure. Page 1 would be a title card, mostly so the adventure doesn't open on an obnoxious flashing panel every time, about 80 mini panel frames for page 2, then another 10 to 20 on page 3, closing the curtains on the Act 1 that never was. And release day, that was a big one. I was very, very meticulous about the schedule. Page 1, the landing page, would be published on 3:42 my time, page 2 would be released on 3:55, and the final page of Act 1 on that day on 4 PM square. Then I'd shill it on the various Discords and Twitter, and onward as previously explained. But this opening, this critical opening was so important to me. This combination and skipping of Act 1, but also having those panels and the GIFs, introducing some elements with the character name that I was very, very excited to see people go out of their way to translate on the MSPFA Discord without me prompting them to do so, appreciating the hard work I put into the panels and becoming very curious. What a very, very special day that was. But, of course, a story does not write itself, and a story definitely does not cultivate itself into a good conclusion. So, let's get back to the looming question that begs answering while all this feverish panel making and publishing was going on. What's actually happening in the story? Okay, so this is where we're going to SBURB TAS spoilers, I guess, and me spilling the beans on what the plans for the comic were I to finish it. Surprise! SBURB TAS is cancelled. My life needs to keep moving on and I can't keep making a webcomic non-stop for years. That's another key difference between Homestuck and this post-Homestuck work. I'm not like Hussey's unique 2009 position where hosting your own website with ads and just making rent from unique readers on your own site is enough to cruise by. I'm on an external platform and my audience base is all Homestuck fans who already read Homestuck. Just can't make a living, and I'd feel bad making it at a snail's pace as a side thing forever, so I'd rather send it off with this video detailing the plans and ideas I had, were I to have time infinite and money and ending. I started SBURB TAS, as I mentioned, as a literal speedrun comic. I had SBURB and I wanted to plan a literal route through it. I made a spreadsheet with 4 rows for each of the characters so I could plan what they were all doing while other things happened, which I think was a fun level of depth to the comic as opposed to a linear stack of events in different places happening one after the other. Not a big thing, but a thing. If you've ever been shown that garbage self-care presentation about filling in the container with big rocks and then medium rocks and then pebbles so the big rocks fit in first, that was also kind of how I planned the story. Big events, then filling in the details, starting with, of course, the end of the comic. Again, time for bin spillage, now's the time to not know how SBURB TAS ends. Alright. Please enjoy my pseudo recreation of the SBURB TAS finale. I had this vision of this song, Spring in a Storm by Tally Hall, perfectly narrating the ending of a SBURB game. The universe bursts with an overworked croak, recrowning of creation, over and over and never again. I'm writing the script before drawing the sketchy art you saw mimicking the potential final animation, but I bet it's very, very emotional for me to actually see that visual I've had lurking at the back of my head for over 2 years now, finally in the eyes of people. And those lyrics inspire the direction for the comic, particularly sing the same thing till the clouds start to cry. A Skyan outpour. The idea of rain from the sky of vision clouds was interesting to me and felt like a nice apocalyptic event to happen to the game world as the end approaches. If you've caught up to the comic before watching this was beginning to manifest with the rain on Pertler and the Lear's land. Slowly, especially during Act 4, the planets would flood save for Issacka's land, which would drain and dry, leaving a squeaking, creaking cork husk as the White King's scepter at its core would keep teleporting the waters to Skya, inspired by this late Homestuck moment where the scepter in a pool of lava causes a harsher destruction of the battlefield. Here, I wanted the clouds to try and cry out the soda emperor into the other planets, accidentally drying out the battlefield from its trees and rivers in the process, creating more unique visuals for the fourth act. All of this working backwards from one song. It's then about filling out like middle key events from the biggest key events. I want this ending and that twist and that fight and that death. So, respectively, I'll need this resolution, this plot device, this conflict of interest, and so on, tying things to each other to try and keep things cohesive. Did I do a perfect job? Wouldn't pretend I did. There were a lot of pretty loosely backed up aspects like the dreamer self just kind of having things happen to them, which I could have spent more time properly workshopping, But then there's parts I'm really happy with, like Isaka's early game king fight plan going wrong twice in a row. The idea was for this self-assured, self-appointed leader to trip down the stairs early on, so his quest is kind of recovering his bearings after stepping into, metaphorically, the real world. His plans and ideas and perfect opportunities didn't work, and now he needs to make a safety net as he falls down. He jetpacks right to Skya from his land as he enters the game, tries killing the king before he can ever evolve with the battlefield, landing on the simple chessboard battlefield, which is a very fun visual to make and work with, but then Pertra's early entrance at the end of Act 2 animation evolves the battlefield under his feet, leading to him being outplayed by the king, hatching up a weird scheme and prospect on his way back. On the more gameplay-focused end of the story, Pertra did a lot of the heavy lifting. She did her land quest as the star of the comic, gathering up turtle puzzle pieces as seen in Homestuck for one panel, because I love taking small nuggets of SBURB and expanding on them, and is rewarded at the end with the animation with a fourth wall from a statue of an offer-insert, allowing her to find out Mario 64 speedrun-esque speed build-up tricks. I liked how in Act 2, because I was serving up the 4th player character for Act 3, I still somehow ended up with 4 characters being following the plot, both future mid-game Pertra doing her land quest and past Pertra still in the entry process. Homestuck's rapidly fluctuating camera of Act 4 was something I really wanted to have in my comic, that whirlwind nature of zipping across space and time following the current events, understanding what's happening alongside the characters. It also left me a ton of production freedom. I could pretty much work on whatever split end of the story rope I was currently in the mood to pull on that morning. I tried maintaining a balance of length and tone, but overall, I was free to, at any point, focus on anywhere for my story, keeping the updates fresh for readers and me. Was this always a good thing? Mostly yes, but there were times I probably needed to deliberate more on some scenes without cutting away as force of habit. It did work for the opposite dramatic effect of when an update lingering on the same scene as yesterday having some "alright, this means a little more than usual" sign. While we're on the topic of handling things and wait for updates, I do wish I did the one major death in the story better. Crimp's death was visually inconsistent, tonally unclear, and I was debating up to the very last second of updating whether to stick this little blurb in there about the Wikipedia quote, and I think I chose wrong by leaving it in. It's a little too pretentious and fartsy, even for me. Not that I am above fartsy pretentiousness at times, that is. This entire ancestor sequence, which I was very excited to do the moment I figured out how to have it parallel current events as well as past events in fun ways, was very incoherent as an actual piece of backstory, but was a lot more floaty, amorphous ideas interacting around characters and figures, a land of both shadow and substance and both things and ideas, specifically to make it harder to parse the literal and instead encourage the reader to gauge the metaphorical. This isn't really a story about the grandparents of the characters or whatever, but prose about the characters themselves and how they relate to one another and how they feel about the role in the story. The password, the devisant, the acromon, and the archival don't need an actual story, but are instead intentionally vague to deliver their metaphors. Back to the plan part of things, in some original version of the timeline there were 4 real acts after the intro, leveling them up to Act 5, but trying to condense the story and placing the act cutoffs at more interesting points ended up dissolving a middle act cut, since I wanted Act 3 to end in a battle before the last Act 4. That battle would be between Isaka, the destabilized leader, and Partless, the rogue player. Not class-wise rogue, but a saboteur. Partless was an interesting factor. When I was first reworking the story from pure speedrun to actual story, I wanted her in a villainous role people didn't exactly expect from one of the 4 players in a SBURB story. She'd unwillingly join the game, and with the destruction SBURB leaves behind, would only wish to harm and hinder the progress of the main team. Pertra would get her in at the last minute, her house in complete shambles from a meteor collapsing into the ocean floor, one of 2 meteors that managed to get in the King's Scepter before Isaac slices it to pieces. The other meteor, and this was a very small deal in the comic, was the Frog Temple, to later seed SBURB and Pertra's Jade Kanaya-style orb room, customary to space players. Pertra's house is situated literally above the active volcano that will later be shown to house the Forge. The water downfall from her entrance sequence created a bed of obsidian, requiring a dangerous demolition job to wake the forge. The rock would be near impenetrable from the outside, but still gushing in the heart of the mountain, so Pertra's big sacrifice in Act 4 would have been toppling her hive like a massive hammer, stoking the forge, and the aftershock causing landfall all across the planet. The fallen hive would cause concern, seeing as one less grist rig can fire into Skya, as well as Icica's house not being built up at all, and Tollus's being destroyed, leaving only the Lears working. This would be mitigated by Dream Icica's prospect construction plans, setting up grist rigs right near the heart of Skya, shooting from Prospect instead of the lands, achieving the same effect. I was supposed to be talking about the fight of Act 3, wasn't I? So, big fight at the end of the act. Another thing I really wanted is to reveal the class specs of my characters in exciting sound page titles, never sharing them online prior. And a fun switcheroo of the fight at the end of Act 3 would be to title it Prince and Witch Duel, naturally leading to assume Icica is the prince, something readers suspected mere hours after he showed up, and Tollus is the evil witch. The next page command right at the bottom of the animation would read Prince, rise up, seemingly spoiling Icica's victory in a way. This was inspired by Tavros Land already under S-Wake, which Hussey responded to the not actually spoiling nature of in a form string question. In reality, the animation would go more like this. Set to the absolutely phenomenal banger of a track, Dupli Blaze Comagma, two heroes stand edge to edge in a pit of skulls, customary to Tollus's land of paperclips and sorrow. The fun part about writing a supposed fight scene is that I can kinda say, and then they fight. I have vague ideas for motions, swooshes, slashes, dodges, but overall, yeah, just visualize some battle entry, you know. Maybe I'm naive, but hey, I'm not doing this Flash, so things for someone else to worry about. After some fighting, Tollus's spear gets knocked away and she simply tries lunging at Icica. In a moment of indecision, Icica picks up the spear, props it for defense, piercing Tollus through the heart, soon dropping the spear and cutting to black. Then, as the song reaches its second phase, ominous laugh is heard as the blood fills up an engraving of the Doom symbol. Light flashes from some skulls and pillars as the ground shakes, revealing the platform the fight takes place on as a quest cocoon, rattling upward as ascension visuals play, flashing light, crows gathering over the floating body of Tollus, as Icica watches in terror as the cocoon expands upwards into the traditional quest bed mountain, skulls tumbling from all sides. The visuals here naturally strongly resemble John Rise Up, especially with two shots of Pertman and Delir on their lands looking upwards into sky as the symbol of doom literally shines across reality. As the song ends, Icica stands alone in the dark pit at the foot of the mountain, collapses to his knees, and falls down in defeat. The bait-and-switch command and page title combo idea then pays off, with a long portrait a la Vriska's Rise Up Thief page, confirming two more class specs, Tollus as the Prince of Doom, and Icica as the Witch of Hope. It was fun examining the little crumbs I planned early on for Icica and the story, being a false leader, and seeing how that arc would mostly parallel that of Jade's and Fefri's class, being the ones that seem to know something about SBURB, but ultimately their plans get foiled outside of their safe bubble of knowledge, leading them to isolation and guilt. Tollus's Prince of Doom title was decided as a strong class spec, somewhat naively, but it does work as a functional story class spec. Destroying through doom, not through bonds, freedom, emotion, and not destroying hope, anger, or knowledge themselves, but destroying using annihilation and prophecy. The saboteur of a session destined to win, the one who can only exact her vengeance using the inevitability of death regardless. In a way, SBURB TAS's premise of a session destined to be won is challenged by a Prince of Doom, by that class spec channeling Homestuck's opposing premise of sessions destined to be lost. Later in Act 4, Delir would use the power of the RNG Rhythmic Neurality Garrison to lock in specific values for frog alchemy, making Pertra's repetitive frog hunt quest unneeded by just having the perfect Genesis frog spawned by RNG manipulation, paying off another part of the SBURB TAS premise. Then, the final big animation at the end of the act was a result in Tollus's chaining her own land to the battlefield in order to try and swing it into Icica's land. Don't ask me how the physics work, but it's a cool big cosmic thing to end on. S Corrode, a nod to S Cascade and S Collide, would play the director's cut mix of Cascade because of the way it sounds more underwatery, because of events I only honestly have vague ideas of, so I won't describe them here. See, that's the thing. I planned all of Act 4 in the key ways, but I haven't gotten to the point where I sit down and really detail the act bit by bit like I already did for Acts 2 and 3. When I finished 3 was when I was gonna get to that, but for now it's kind of a mishmash of vague ideas, nothing very set in stone yet. Like, that swinging of a planet into another planet was one of the more coherent ones for context, not in a everything else is wacky and bizarre way, just not really a complete idea ready to be put on paper. Some hives collapse, there's a rescue mission for the Lear. I'd rather not delve deep into that, but I still really wish I could have gotten to that point, to actually tell the complete story, but alas, this will have to suffice. If all goes right, this is coming out October 24th, 2022, and I can finally rest with my story set as complete after exactly 2 years. If you're on the MSPFA site, this should be page 554, and the final page 555 will be a credits page thanking my friends who got me into Homestuck originally, as I live read through it and as I started working on the comic all the way in 2020. This was an amazing process, absolutely incredible 2 years of research and learning and writing and creating and drawing and seeing people actually react to a piece of art I was making, and publishing was something I absolutely never thought I'd get to do on the scale that I did end up doing it, and it was amazing. I really hope more stories on MSPFA somehow get to finish, because the amazing comics being made there now are absolutely fantastic and deserve to be told in all their glory. This video was very, very important to me. This story, this adventure, this process, it's really, really something special. Homestuck was cool, so I wrote a Homestuck. Now what? Who cares? It was very fun. Go make some cool art. Thank you for watching my video. Goodbye.